The grand ballroom of the celestial palace shimmered with the light of 1,000 enchanted crystals. Lady Seraphina Ashford stood at the edge of the marble dance floor, her silver gown flowing like moonlight around her slender frame. She held a glass of champagne that had long since gone warm in her trembling hand. Across the room, Prince Edmund laughed. His arm was wrapped possessively around Lady Charlotte Pembroke's waist. The woman wore emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. They looked radiant together, every inch the ideal royal couple. The sight made Seraphina's chest tighten with a familiar ache. It had been 6 months since Edmund had broken their engagement. 6 months since he'd stood in her family's drawing room and calmly explained that while she was perfectly acceptable, Charlotte was the daughter of a duke. The political alliance simply made more sense. He delivered the news with all the emotion of someone discussing the weather. Seraphina had kept her dignity that day. She'd nodded gracefully, returned his ring without protest, and walked him to the door. Only after he'd left did she allow herself to collapse in her mother's arms, sobbing until she had no tears left. Now, watching him spin Charlotte across the dance floor, Seraphina wondered why she'd even come tonight. Her mother had insisted it would look weak to hide away. The Ashford family had pride, after all. They didn't cower from awkward social situations. So here she stood, a monument to that pride, slowly crumbling inside. "You look like you're contemplating murder." The voice came from directly beside her, smooth and tinged with amusement. Seraphina startled, nearly dropping her champagne. She turned to find a man standing closer than propriety usually allowed. He was tall, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of polished obsidian. His formal attire was immaculate, but there was something about him that seemed too sharp for the soft elegance of the ballroom. "I assure you, my thoughts are perfectly civilized," Seraphina replied, recovering her composure. She didn't recognize him, which was unusual. She knew virtually everyone in the noble circles. "Pity," the stranger said, his lips curved into a slight smile. "I find civilized thoughts terribly dull." Despite herself, Seraphina felt her own mouth quirk upward. "Then you must be perpetually bored at events like these." "Generally, yes, though tonight is proving more interesting than expected." His dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Kael Malthus, I'm recently arrived from the Northern Territories." "Seraphina Ashford." She offered her hand, which he took and brought to his lips. The gesture was old-fashioned, but he executed it with a natural grace that didn't feel rehearsed. "I know who you are," Kael said, still holding her hand. "The woman brave enough to attend a ball where her former fiancé parades his new conquest like a tournament trophy." Seraphina withdrew her hand, her cheeks warming. "You're remarkably well-informed for someone recently arrived." "I make it my business to know interesting people. And you, Lady Ashford, are far more interesting than you give yourself credit for." He gestured toward the dance floor where Edmund and Charlotte were now posing for the official court painter. "Tell me, do you still love him?" The question was impertinent, but something about Kael's directness made the usual social deflections seem pointless. Seraphina considered for a moment, genuinely thinking about it. "No," she said finally, surprising herself with the realization. "I don't think I do. I loved the idea of him, perhaps, the future we'd planned, but him specifically." She shook her head. "What I feel now is more wounded pride than heartbreak." "Honest," Kael observed. "I appreciate that. Most people in your position would claim undying devotion or complete indifference. You choose the complicated truth instead." "And what brings you to our corner of the realm, Lord Malthus, besides gathering information on interesting people?" His smile widened. "Would you believe diplomatic relations?" "Not particularly." "Perceptive as well as honest. I like you, Seraphina Ashford." He set down his own untouched glass of wine on a passing servant's tray. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite a command either. Seraphina glanced at the dance floor, where Edmund was now leading Charlotte through an elaborate waltz. Half the room was watching them, enchanted by the fairy-tale romance. "People will talk," she said. "People are already talking. About you, standing here alone while your ex-fiancé performs his happiness for an audience. Give them something more interesting to discuss." He was right, Seraphina realized. She was already the object of pitying glances and whispered gossip. At least if she danced, she'd look less pathetic. She set down her champagne and placed her hand in Kael's. "One dance." "We'll see," he murmured, leading her onto the floor. The orchestra was playing a traditional Viennese waltz. As Kael's hand settled on her waist and he took her other hand in his, Seraphina was struck by how different he felt from Edmund. Edmund had always been correct in his dancing, precise but passionless. Kael moved with a fluid confidence that made following him effortless. They swept into the pattern of the dance, and Seraphina found herself relaxing for the first time all evening. Kael was an exceptional dancer, guiding her through turns and flourishes with just the slightest pressure of his hand. "You're causing quite a stir," he said quietly. "Your former prince keeps glancing this way." "I'd rather not discuss him," Seraphina replied. "Fair enough. What would you like to discuss?" "You could tell me the real reason you're here. And please don't insult my intelligence with more talk of diplomatic relations." Kael's laugh was low and genuine. "Very well. I came because I heard about you." Seraphina missed a step, but he steadied her seamlessly. "That makes no sense. I'm nobody important." "You're the daughter of a viscount, educated at the finest academies, fluent in 6 languages, and according to several sources, you possess a remarkable talent for magical theory. Hardly nobody." "Those are just facts anyone could learn. That's not knowing someone." "True," Kael acknowledged, spinning her through a turn that brought them momentarily closer than the dance strictly required. "So let me tell you what else I know. You've spent your entire life being the perfect noble daughter, saying the right things, wearing the right clothes, pursuing the right match. And despite doing everything correctly, you were still discarded for someone with a more impressive title." The words stung because they were accurate. Seraphina stiffened in his arms. "If you're trying to be cruel—" "I'm trying to be honest," Kael interrupted. "You played by their rules and lost anyway. Doesn't that make you angry?" "Anger is unbecoming in a lady." "So is heartbreak, yet here you are, wearing it like an accessory to that beautiful gown." His dark eyes held hers. "What if you stopped trying to be becoming? What if you did exactly what you wanted, consequences be damned?" "That's easy to say, when you're not the one who has to live with the consequences." "Who says I don't live with consequences?" Something flickered across Kael's face, gone too quickly to identify. "I simply choose which consequences I'm willing to accept." The music was building toward its crescendo. Around them, other couples whirled and spun, but Seraphina was only aware of Kael and the strange magnetism he seemed to exude. "Why are you really here?" she asked again. "The truth this time." Kael was quiet for a long moment as they moved through the final measures of the waltz. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the music. "Because I'm tired of watching good people diminish themselves to fit into boxes created by those who don't deserve them. And because when I heard about the noble lady who was discarded like yesterday's news, I wondered if she might be tired of it too." The final note hung in the air. The dance ended with Kael dipping Seraphina in a sweeping arc that drew appreciative murmurs from the watching crowd. As he brought her upright again, their faces were inches apart. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Ashford," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that contradicted his tone. "Thank you, Lord Malthus," she replied, acutely aware that the entire ballroom seemed to be looking at them. He released her and stepped back with a proper bow. Seraphina curtsied in return, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the exertion of dancing. As she turned to leave the floor, she caught sight of Edmund. He was no longer smiling. Charlotte was saying something to him, but he wasn't paying attention. He was staring at Seraphina with an expression she couldn't quite read. Good, she thought with a surge of vindictive satisfaction. Let him wonder. She made her way to the refreshment table, accepting a new glass of champagne from a servant. Several acquaintances immediately converged on her, all eager to know about her mysterious dance partner. "Who is he?" Lady Margaret Winters demanded, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Lord Kael Malthus, from the Northern Territories," Seraphina replied, keeping her voice casual. "I've never heard of him," Margaret said suspiciously. "The North is a large region," Seraphina pointed out. "I'm sure there are many noble families we're not familiar with." Before Margaret could probe further, the master of ceremonies called for attention. The king was about to make an announcement. King Aldrich rose from his throne, resplendent in royal purple. Beside him, Queen Eleanor smiled graciously at the assembled nobles. "My dear friends," the king began, his voice magically amplified to reach every corner of the ballroom. "We are gathered tonight not only to celebrate the season, but to honor the strengthening of alliances between our great houses." Here it comes, Seraphina thought, the formal announcement of Edmund and Charlotte's engagement. She braced herself, determined to maintain her composure. "It is my great pleasure to announce the engagement of my son, Prince Edmund, to Lady Charlotte Pembroke. May their union bring prosperity to both families and to our realm." Applause erupted throughout the ballroom. Edmund and Charlotte moved to the center of the floor, basking in the attention. Charlotte's smile was radiant. Edmund looked pleased, though Seraphina noticed his gaze kept drifting back to where she stood. "Additionally," the king continued, raising his hand for silence, "we have the honor of hosting a very special guest this evening. A dignitary from a realm with which we have not always enjoyed peaceful relations." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Seraphina frowned, wondering what the king meant. "I ask you all to join me in welcoming Lord Kael Malthus, emissary from the Shadowlands, here to negotiate a new treaty of cooperation between our peoples." The applause this time was notably more hesitant. The Shadowlands. Seraphina felt her stomach drop. The Shadowlands were home to demons, dark magic, and everything civilized society considered dangerous. She looked around for Kael and found him emerging from a side gallery. He walked with unhurried confidence toward the king, seemingly unbothered by the wary stares following him. "Your Majesty," Kael said, bowing deeply, "I thank you for your hospitality and for this opportunity to build bridges between our realms. We are hopeful that this marks a new era of understanding," King Aldrich replied diplomatically. Seraphina's mind was reeling. She danced with a demon, or at least an emissary from their realm. No wonder he'd seemed so different from the other nobles. He wasn't one of them at all. And he'd sought her out specifically. Why? As if sensing her thoughts, Kael's eyes found hers across the crowded room. He smiled, that same enigmatic expression he'd worn during their dance. Then, to her shock, he began walking directly toward her. The crowd parted for him, nobles stepping aside with barely concealed nervousness. Lady Margaret made a small squeaking sound and quickly moved away, suddenly remembering an urgent need to speak with someone on the other side of the room. Within moments, Seraphina stood alone as Kael approached. "You didn't mention you were a demon," she said quietly when he was close enough to hear. "You didn't ask," he replied. "And technically I'm only half demon. My mother was human." "That's supposed to be reassuring." "It's supposed to be the truth. I told you I'd stop insulting your intelligence with pleasant lies." Before Seraphina could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Seraphina." She turned to find Edmund standing behind her, Charlotte conspicuously absent. His expression was troubled. "Edmund," she acknowledged coolly. "Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you, we need to talk privately." "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." "Please," his voice dropped to an urgent whisper. "You shouldn't be associating with him. People are talking, your reputation." "My reputation?" Seraphina felt a spark of genuine anger. "You ended our engagement 6 months ago, Edmund. My reputation ceased to be your concern." "I still care about you," he insisted. "And I'm telling you, getting involved with the Shadowlands delegation is dangerous." Kael stepped forward slightly, not threatening but unmistakably present. "The lady seems capable of making her own decisions about danger, Your Highness." Edmund's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it? You seem to be bothering someone under my protection." "Your protection?" Edmund's voice rose slightly. "Seraphina is a noble lady of this realm. She doesn't need protection from the likes of you." "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why she accepted my invitation to dance and is now looking at you like she'd rather be anywhere else." It was true, Seraphina realized. Standing between these two men, she knew exactly which one she wanted to walk away from. "Edmund," she said firmly, "I appreciate your concern, but it's misplaced. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe your fiancé is looking for you." She nodded toward Charlotte, who was indeed watching them with poorly concealed jealousy from across the room. Edmund opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He gave Kael one last dark look before turning and walking back to Charlotte. "Well handled," Kael murmured. "Don't congratulate me for basic self-respect," Seraphina replied, but there was no heat in it. She was surprised to find she felt lighter than she had in months. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions and careful political conversations. Kael was in demand, with various nobles approaching to assess the demon emissary for themselves. Through it all, he remained charming but enigmatic, revealing nothing of substance while making everyone feel heard. Seraphina watched him work the room and realized he was far more skilled at court politics than his earlier dismissiveness had suggested. He played the game expertly, even as he claimed to despise it. As the ball began to wind down, Kael found his way back to her side. "I'm hosting a smaller gathering tomorrow evening at my residence," he said. "A dinner for those interested in learning more about cultural exchange with the Shadowlands. I'd be honored if you would attend." "Why me?" Seraphina asked. "You've met half the court tonight, many of them far more influential than I am." "Because you asked me about magical theory while we danced, not about trade agreements or military capabilities. You're curious about the actual knowledge, not just how to exploit it." Seraphina hesitated. Accepting would cement her association with the Shadowlands delegation in everyone's minds. It would likely scandalize her mother and give Edmund more ammunition for his concerned warnings. Then again, wasn't she tired of living for other people's approval? "What time should I arrive?" she asked. Kael's smile was genuine and warm. 8 o'clock. I'll send my carriage for you." "That won't be necessary. I can arrange my own transportation." "Independent as well as intelligent. I'm increasingly impressed, Lady Ashford." He took her hand and kissed it again, his lips warm against her skin. "Until tomorrow evening." He left shortly after, citing the late hour and his need to prepare for the next day's negotiations. Seraphina remained for another 30 minutes, maintaining appearances, before finally calling for her own carriage. As she settled into the cushioned seat for the ride home, she replayed the entire evening in her mind. She'd survived watching Edmund celebrate his engagement. More than survived, actually. She'd danced with a demon, held her own in verbal sparring with one of the most intriguing men she'd ever met, and accepted an invitation that would have scandalized her 6 months ago. Her mother was going to have an absolute fit. The thought made Seraphina smile into the darkness of the carriage. For the first time since Edmund had broken their engagement, she felt like herself again. Not the diminished, heartbroken version she'd been carrying around, but someone stronger. Someone who could make her own choices. Tomorrow would bring complications, she was certain. But tonight, riding through the lamplit streets, Seraphina Ashford felt something she hadn't experienced in a long while. She felt free. The morning sun streamed through Seraphina's bedroom window, finding her already awake and staring at the ceiling. She'd barely slept, her mind too full of dark eyes and dangerous possibilities. A knock at her door preceded her lady's maid, Clara, entering with a breakfast tray and an expression of barely suppressed excitement. "My lady, the whole household is talking about last night. They say you danced with the demon lord himself." "He's an emissary, not a lord," Seraphina corrected automatically, sitting up. "And he's only half demon." "Still, my lady, that's quite the statement, dancing with him while Prince Edmund was right there with his new lady." Clara set the tray across Seraphina's lap, her eyes gleaming. "Cook says you looked absolutely radiant together. She heard it from the footman whose cousin works in the palace kitchens." Seraphina smiled despite herself. The servant network was faster than any official news channel. "I'm sure the gossip has been greatly exaggerated." "Perhaps, but you can't deny it's exciting. You've been so sad these past months, my lady. It's good to see you doing something for yourself." Before Seraphina could respond, there was another knock. This one was sharper, more insistent. Clara hurried to answer it, and Seraphina's mother swept into the room like a ship in full sail. Lady Catherine Ashford was a handsome woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair and the kind of posture that suggested she'd never slouched a day in her life. Her expression was carefully neutral, which Seraphina had learned long ago meant she was furious. "Clara, leave us," Catherine said curtly. The maid bobbed a quick curtsy and fled. Seraphina set down her teacup and braced herself. "Before you say anything," she began, "I can explain." "Explain what exactly?" "How you chose to publicly associate yourself with a delegation from the Shadowlands. How you danced with a half-demon in full view of the court and your former fiancée. Or perhaps you'd like to explain why I'm hearing from Lady Pembroke that you've accepted an invitation to dine at Lord Malthus's residence tonight." Seraphina blinked. How did Lady Pembroke know that? I only accepted the invitation last night. She heard it from Edmund, who apparently heard it from Lord Malthus himself. The demon was spreading word of your acceptance before you'd even left the ball. Catherine sat down heavily on the chair beside the bed. "Seraphina, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that I spent months being the perfect example of gracious defeat. I smiled through the engagement announcement. I've endured the pitying looks and the whispered gossip. And last night, for the first time since Edmund broke our engagement, I felt like something other than a failure." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Oh, my dear, you were never a failure." "Wasn't I? I did everything right, Mother. Everything you and Father taught me, and it still wasn't enough. Edmund was a fool to let you go. But darling, this isn't the way to prove your worth. Kael Malthus is dangerous." "You don't know that. No one knows anything about him except that he's here to negotiate a treaty." "He's from the Shadowlands, Seraphina. That's all I need to know." Catherine reached out and took her daughter's hand. "I understand you're hurt and angry, but making reckless decisions out of spite will only harm you in the long run." "What if it's not about spite?" Seraphina asked quietly. "What if I genuinely find him interesting? He's intelligent, well-read, and he actually listens when I speak instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. Is that so impossible to believe?" Catherine studied her daughter's face for a long moment. "You really like him?" "I barely know him. But yes, I'd like to know him better. Is that allowed, or do I need Edmund's permission for my social calendar now?" That's not fair. Isn't it? Everyone seems to think they have a say in what I do, how I behave, who I associate with. Everyone except me. Seraphina pulled her hand back gently. I'm going to dinner tonight, Mother. I'm going because I was invited, and because I want to learn more about Shadowlands culture, and yes, because I want to see Kael again. You can either support my decision or not, but you won't change my mind. Catherine stood, her spine rigid again. Very well. If you're determined to do this, at least take Clara with you as a chaperone. And wear the blue dress, not the silver. Silver is too formal for a dinner party. It took Seraphina a moment to process what had just happened. You're giving me fashion advice. Someone has to. If you're going to potentially scandalize the family, you might as well look impeccable while doing it. Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, he did seem quite taken with you, and he has excellent taste in dancing. After her mother left, Seraphina sat in stunned silence. That had gone far better than expected. She'd been prepared for threats of disownment, not wardrobe consultation. She spent the rest of the day in her father's library, researching everything she could find about the Shadowlands. The information was frustratingly sparse and clearly biased. Most texts portrayed the demon realm as a place of chaos and darkness, ruled by powerful lords who commanded terrible magic. But there were occasional glimpses of something more nuanced. A travel diary from 2 centuries ago described beautiful cities built into mountains of black glass. A treaty from the last failed negotiation mentioned sophisticated governance structures and complex magical academies. The Shadowlands weren't the savage wasteland the popular imagination painted them as. They were simply different, and difference always frightened people. By the time evening approached, Seraphina had changed her dress 3 times. She'd finally settled on the blue gown her mother had suggested, a deep sapphire silk that brought out the gray of her eyes. Clara had arranged her dark blonde hair in an elegant updo with a few artful curls framing her face. You look beautiful, my lady, Clara said, securing the final pin. I look nervous, Seraphina corrected, examining her reflection. That too, but in a good way, if you don't mind me saying, like you're about to have an adventure. Adventure, it was a good word for it. Seraphina had spent her whole life being safe, being appropriate. Maybe it was time for an adventure. The carriage ride to Kael's residence took her to a part of the city she rarely visited, where the old noble houses gave way to newer construction. The building that served as the Shadowlands embassy was an elegant townhouse in dark stone, its windows glowing with warm light. A servant in dark livery helped her down from the carriage and escorted her inside. The interior was surprisingly cozy, with rich fabrics and carefully chosen artwork that blended styles from both realms. It felt lived in rather than merely diplomatic. Kael appeared at the top of the stairs, and Seraphina's breath caught slightly. He was dressed more casually than he had been at the ball, though still impeccably tailored. Without the formal court attire, he looked younger, more approachable. Lady Ashford, he said, descending to meet her. I'm delighted you came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might reconsider in the clear light of day. Most people do when they realize they've agreed to dine with demons. His tone was light, but there was genuine pleasure in his eyes at seeing her. I'm not most people. No, he agreed softly. You're certainly not. He offered his arm, and she took it, allowing him to guide her to a drawing room where several other guests had already gathered. Seraphina recognized a few faces from the ball, younger nobles known for their progressive views and scholarly interests. Lord Sebastian Hartley, a scholar of comparative theology, was in animated discussion with a woman Seraphina didn't recognize. She had silver-white hair and eyes that held an unnatural amber glow. Lady Ashford, may I introduce Lyra, one of my colleagues from the Shadowlands, Kael said. She's an expert in dimensional magic theory. A pleasure, Lyra said, her voice carrying a slight accent. Kael mentioned you have an interest in magical theory. An amateur interest at best, Seraphina demurred. Don't let her modesty fool you, Kael interjected. She wrote a treatise on convergent ley lines that was published in the Royal Academy Journal last year. Seraphina blinked at him. How did you know about that? I told you, I make it my business to know interesting people. Your paper was quite insightful, particularly your observations about seasonal fluctuations in magical currents. Before Seraphina could respond, Lyra laughed. He does this to everyone, knows impossibly specific details about their lives, and then acts like it's perfectly normal. I've learned to just accept it. It's called being thorough, Kael protested. It's called being slightly obsessive, Lyra countered, but her tone was affectionate. She turned to Seraphina. I'd love to discuss your ley line research over dinner. We've done similar studies in the Shadowlands with fascinating results. Dinner was a revelation. The food was a fusion of both realms' cuisines, flavors Seraphina had never experienced before. The conversation was even better, flowing from magical theory to art to philosophy without the rigid structure of formal court dinners. Seraphina found herself genuinely enjoying the company. Lord Hartley had a dry wit that kept everyone laughing. A young mage named Cassandra had recently returned from studying healing techniques in the eastern provinces and had stories that were both horrifying and hilarious. But it was the moments of conversation with Kael that Seraphina treasured most. He would lean in to explain a reference she didn't understand, his voice low and meant only for her. He asked thoughtful questions about her research and actually listened to the answers. When she made a joke, his laugh was genuine and warm. As the evening wore on and the other guests gradually departed, Seraphina realized she and Kael were suddenly alone in the drawing room. Clara had fallen asleep in a chair in the corner, exhausted from the late hour. I should probably go, Seraphina said reluctantly. It's late. Probably, Kael agreed, but he made no move to call for her carriage. Did you enjoy yourself? Very much. Your colleagues are wonderful, and the discussion about trans-dimensional properties of obsidian was fascinating. Most people would have found it incredibly boring. Most people don't appreciate the elegance of theoretical magic. Seraphina smiled. Thank you for inviting me. This was exactly what I needed. What you needed? Yes, to feel like myself again, like someone with interests and opinions beyond just being someone's former fiancée. She stood, and Kael rose with her. You were right last night. I had been diminishing myself to fit into boxes other people made. This evening reminded me who I actually am. Kael stepped closer, his dark eyes intense. And who are you, Seraphina Ashford? I'm still figuring that out, she admitted. But I think I'm someone braver than I gave myself credit for. I could have told you that. He reached out and gently tucked a loose curl behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, tender. The bravest person at that ball wasn't the prince announcing his engagement or the king hosting ancient enemies. It was you, standing alone and refusing to break. Seraphina's heart was racing. They were standing so close she could see flecks of red in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him. Kael, she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. Yes. Before either of them could move, Clara snorted awake in the corner. The moment shattered. Kael stepped back smoothly, and Seraphina felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed. I'll have my carriage take you home, Kael said, his voice carefully neutral. When can I see you again? I don't know. Is that presumptuous of you to assume there will be an again? His smile was crooked, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Desperately presumptuous, but I find I don't particularly care. The gardens at Ashford House. Tomorrow afternoon at 3. We can walk the grounds properly chaperoned, and I can show you my mother's rose collection. I'll be there. The carriage ride home was quiet except for Clara's gentle snoring. Seraphina watched the city pass by outside her window and tried to process everything she was feeling. She liked him, more than liked him. Kael made her feel seen in a way Edmund never had. With Edmund, she'd always felt like she was performing the role of proper noble lady. With Kael, she could just be herself. But there were complications. He was from the Shadowlands, here on a temporary diplomatic mission. Even if something developed between them, what future could they possibly have? Her family would never approve of a permanent attachment to a half-demon, no matter how charming or educated he was. And yet, as the carriage pulled up to Ashford House, Seraphina found herself smiling. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Seraphina was in the garden sketching when a servant announced Prince Edmund. She looked up in surprise, her pencil stilling. "Edmund, this is unexpected." He looked uncomfortable, his usual princely confidence notably absent. "I know I have no right to call on you unannounced, but I needed to speak with you, privately." Seraphina glanced at the servant, who discreetly retreated out of earshot but remained visible, as propriety required. "Very well, what's so urgent?" Edmund sat on the bench beside her, though he left careful space between them. "I wanted to apologize for last night, for questioning your decisions. You were right. Your social calendar is no longer my concern." "Thank you, was that all?" "No." He turned to face her fully. "Seraphina, I made a mistake. Breaking our engagement was a mistake." The words hung in the air between them. Seraphina felt oddly detached, as if she were watching this scene happen to someone else. "You're engaged to Charlotte," she said carefully. "An engagement can be broken. You of all people should know that." The casual cruelty of the statement, even unintentional, took her breath away. "Edmund, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I want you back. These past months without you, watching Charlotte, I've realized what I lost. You understood me. You challenged me intellectually in ways she never does. And seeing you last night with that demon, laughing and dancing like you didn't have a care in the world." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "It made me realize how much I still care for you." "How convenient," Seraphina said coolly, "that you realized this only after seeing me with someone else. Tell me, Edmund, would you be here if I'd spent last night sitting alone in a corner looking heartbroken?" "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" She stood, needing distance. "You ended our engagement because Charlotte's political connections were more valuable than our relationship. You made a calculated decision, and now that calculation isn't working out the way you hoped. You want to undo it." "I made a mistake," Edmund repeated. "Can't you forgive me?" "This isn't about forgiveness. This is about the fact that you saw me as a safe, acceptable option that you could set aside when something better came along. And now you want me back because I'm no longer acting safe or acceptable." "You're being unreasonable." Seraphina laughed, the sound brittle. 6 months ago, you broke my heart in my family's drawing room. You were calm and rational and so very reasonable about why you had to marry someone else. And I accepted it because I'd been taught that being understanding and gracious was what good women did. But you know what, Edmund? I don't feel very understanding right now. So this is about revenge, making me jealous by parading around with a demon. This is about me finally realizing that I deserve better than someone who would discard me when it was convenient and try to reclaim me when I started to look happy. Seraphina met his eyes steadily. "I don't love you anymore, Edmund. I'm not sure I ever really did. And even if Kael Malthus didn't exist, even if I were completely alone, I would still say no to you." Edmund stood, his expression hardening. "You'll regret this. That demon will use you and discard you, and where will you be then? Damaged goods that no respectable man will want. Then I suppose I'll be single and damaged and finally free of caring what respectable men want from me. She turned away, dismissing him. "Goodbye, Edmund. Please don't call on me again." She heard him leave, his footsteps angry against the gravel path. Only when she was sure he was gone did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, not from fear or regret, but from the sheer adrenaline of standing up for herself. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. "My lady," the servant had returned. "Are you quite all right?" "Yes," Seraphina said, surprised to find it was true. "Yes, I think I'm better than all right." That afternoon, Kael arrived precisely at 3. He wore casual riding clothes and carried a small bouquet of night-blooming roses, their dark petals almost black in the sunlight. "I hope I'm not being presumptuous again," he said, offering them to her. "But these reminded me of you." "How do black roses remind you of me?" "They bloom in darkness. They're beautiful precisely because they're unexpected." His eyes held hers. "And they're infinitely more interesting than regular roses." Seraphina took the flowers, her cheeks warming. "That's either very romantic or very strange. I haven't decided which." "Can it be both?" They walked through the gardens, Clara trailing at a discreet distance. Seraphina showed him her mother's prized roses, the lily pond her father had commissioned, the ancient oak tree she'd climbed as a child against all protests. "I had a visit from Edmund this morning," she said as they paused beside a fountain. Kael's expression didn't change, but she sensed a sudden tension in him. "Oh." "He wanted me back, said breaking our engagement was a mistake." "I see, and what did you say?" "I said no, rather emphatically, actually." She glanced at him, trying to read his face. "He suggested I was only spending time with you to make him jealous." "Are you?" "No, I'm spending time with you because you're fascinating and brilliant, and you make me feel like myself instead of some diminished version I've been performing for years." She paused. "But I need to know something. Why me, Kael? Really? You could have allied yourself with dozens of more influential nobles. Why seek out the heartbroken former fiancé of a prince?" Kael was quiet for a long moment, looking at the water flowing in the fountain. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. "Because 3 months ago, I attended a different ball in a different kingdom, a celebration of some duke's birthday, and I watched a young woman stand alone at the edge of the room while her former betrothed danced with his new love. She held her head high, even though she was clearly breaking inside. And I thought, there's someone who understands what it means to be strong when everything in you wants to crumble." Seraphina felt her breath catch. "You've been watching me for 3 months." "Not watching, researching, learning. I told you I make it my business to know interesting people." He turned to face her. "The truth is, I came to this realm specifically to negotiate a treaty, yes. But I also came because I wanted to meet the woman who could hold on to her dignity when everything else was being taken from her." That's, she didn't know how to finish that sentence. "Obsessive, slightly unhinged. Yes, Lyra has already made those points." His smile was self-deprecating. "I have a tendency to become fixated on things that interest me. Right now, you interest me more than anything else in either realm." "I'm not some puzzle for you to solve, Kael." "No, you're not. You're a brilliant, complicated woman who deserves better than to be treated like a consolation prize by an idiot prince." He stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to marry me or even to commit to anything beyond enjoying my company. I'm simply asking if you want to keep exploring this connection between us, whatever it turns out to be." Seraphina looked at him, really looked. His eyes were earnest despite their demonic cast. His posture was open, vulnerable. He was offering her something Edmund never had, honesty and choice. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to keep exploring this." His smile was radiant. "Good, because I've arranged for us to visit the Royal Library tomorrow. They have a collection of pre-sundering magical texts that I think you'll find absolutely riveting." Seraphina laughed. Most men offer dinner or dancing. You offer ancient academic texts. I'm not most men. No, she agreed, feeling something warm and bright unfurling in her chest. You're certainly not. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. Clara dozed on a bench in the sun. The world felt peaceful, suspended in a perfect moment. When Kael finally took his leave as the sun began to set, he kissed Seraphina's hand in that old-fashioned way of his. But this time, his lips lingered just a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Until tomorrow," he murmured. "Until tomorrow," she echoed. That night, Seraphina fell asleep with black roses on her nightstand and hope blooming in her heart. The royal library was a cathedral to knowledge, all soaring ceilings and endless shelves of leather-bound wisdom. Seraphina had been here countless times for research, but seeing it through Kael's eyes made it feel new again. "This section contains texts from before the Sundering," the head librarian explained, leading them to a restricted area. "Normally, access is limited to senior scholars, but Lord Malthus's credentials from the Shadowlands Academy were impeccable." "I may have embellished them slightly," Kael murmured to Seraphina once the librarian had left them alone. "You forged documents to get library access." "Forged is such an ugly word. I prefer creatively interpreted my qualifications." He pulled a massive tome from the shelf, its cover decorated with symbols that seemed to shift in the light. "Besides, the knowledge in these books belongs to both our realms. The Sundering didn't erase that shared history, even if everyone pretends it did." The Sundering. 1,000 years ago, when a catastrophic magical war had split the world into separate realms. The human lands and the Shadowlands had been one kingdom once, before fear and ambition tore everything apart. Seraphina ran her fingers over the ancient text. "Do you think we can really bridge that divide, after so long?" "I think holding on to old hatreds is exhausting, and most people are tired," Kael replied. "The treaty I'm negotiating isn't just about trade routes and magical cooperation. It's about remembering that we were one people once, that we could be again in time." They spent hours poring over the texts, sharing discoveries and debating interpretations. Kael was brilliant, his understanding of magical theory both deep and creative. But what Seraphina appreciated most was how he listened to her ideas, taking them seriously even when they contradicted his own theories. "You should publish this," he said after she'd outlined her hypothesis about pre-Sundering ley line networks. "This could revolutionize how we understand dimensional barriers." "The Academy would never take me seriously. I'm not a formal scholar." "Then publish it in the Shadowlands. We're less concerned with credentials and more interested in actual merit." He looked up from the manuscript he'd been examining. "Or better yet, come to the Shadowlands and present it yourself. The Dimensional Magic Conference is in 3 months. You'd be a sensation." Seraphina's heart skipped. "You're asking me to travel to the Shadowlands." "I'm asking you to consider it. You'd be under my personal protection, of course, and you'd have access to libraries and research facilities that don't exist anywhere else." His expression grew more intense. "I'm asking you to imagine a future beyond this kingdom, these expectations. A place where your mind would be valued more than your marital status." It was tempting, so tempting, but also terrifying. "I can't just leave my family, my entire life." "I'm not asking you to leave forever, just to visit, to see what else exists beyond the boundaries you've been taught to accept." Kael reached across the table and took her hand. "Seraphina, you're extraordinary, but this place, these people, they're trying to make you ordinary. Don't let them." Before she could respond, voices echoed through the library. Familiar voices. Seraphina quickly pulled her hand back as Edmund and Charlotte appeared at the end of the aisle. "Seraphina," Edmund said, his tone disapproving. "I should have known I'd find you here, with him." "The library is open to all scholars," Seraphina replied coolly. Or did you need something specific? Charlotte clutched Edmund's arm, eyeing Kael with poorly concealed nervousness. We were looking for wedding planning resources, the history of royal ceremonies. How romantic, Kael said dryly. Nothing says eternal love like researching proper candelabra placement. Edmund's jaw tightened. Some of us take our commitments seriously. Do you? That's a recent development. Kael, Seraphina said quietly, touching his arm. Don't. He subsided, but his eyes remained hard as he looked at Edmund. The prince seemed to realize he'd ventured into dangerous territory and changed tactics. Seraphina, I spoke with your father yesterday. He's concerned about your recent associations. As am I. This friendship is causing talk. Let them talk, Seraphina said, surprised by her own boldness. You don't understand what you're risking. Your reputation, your family's standing. What I understand is that you broke our engagement and then got upset when I didn't spend the rest of my life mourning it. My friendships are no longer your concern, Edmund. You made sure of that. Charlotte, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Lady Ashford, I hope there are no hard feelings between us. Edmund speaks so highly of you, and I'd hate for there to be awkwardness. The sheer audacity of the statement left Seraphina momentarily speechless. Charlotte wanted them to be friends, or at least civil acquaintances who could smile at each other over tea while pretending there was no history. Lady Pembroke, Seraphina said carefully, I wish you every happiness in your marriage, but let's not pretend we'll be attending needlework circles together. There's no need to be rude, Edmund started, but Kael stood abruptly. Actually, there is. You ended your relationship with Lady Ashford in the most clinical, heartless manner possible. You then paraded your new fiancée in front of her at a royal ball. And now, you have the audacity to lecture her about her choices while simultaneously asking her to be pleasant to your future wife. Kael's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. With respect, Your Highness, you have no standing to judge anyone's behavior. The temperature in the library seemed to drop. Edmund looked like he might actually take a swing at Kael, but Charlotte pulled him back. Edmund, please, let's just go. For a moment, Seraphina thought Edmund might refuse, but he allowed himself to be led away, though not before throwing one last look at Seraphina that she couldn't quite interpret. Once they were gone, Seraphina sank back into her chair. That was a disaster. That was necessary, Kael corrected. He needed to understand that you're not the same woman he left behind, that you have people who will defend you now. Is that what you're doing, defending me? Among other things. He sat back down, his anger fading into something softer. Does it bother you that I spoke up? I don't know. Part of me is grateful. Part of me feels like I should have handled it myself. You did handle it beautifully, I just added emphasis. Kael studied her face. You're stronger than you think, Seraphina. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. And how do you see me? As someone who's just beginning to realize her own power. He stood and offered his hand. Come on, I want to show you something. He led her through the library to a section she'd never noticed before, a small alcove with a window overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold. This is where I come when I need to think, Kael said. The Shadowlands embassy has an excellent library, but it doesn't have this view. They stood side by side, watching the city below. People moved through the streets, tiny and purposeful, living their lives unaware of the two people watching from above. I'm scared, Seraphina admitted quietly. Of what I'm feeling, of what it might mean. You'll leave eventually. The treaty negotiations will end, and you'll go back to the Shadowlands. And I'll be here, having broken every social convention for something temporary. What if it doesn't have to be temporary? Seraphina's heart stuttered. What? Kael turned to face her fully. What if you came with me? Not forever, not unless you wanted to, but for a visit. To see the Shadowlands, to present your research, to explore what we could be without all these expectations weighing on you. Kael, I can't just abandon my family, my responsibilities. You're not responsible for managing everyone else's expectations of you. You're allowed to want things for yourself. His hands came up to cup her face gently. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm asking you to think about it, to imagine a life where you get to choose. They were so close. Seraphina could feel his breath on her face, could see the flecks of red in his dark eyes that marked his demonic heritage. She should step back. This was improper. They were alone in a public library anyone could see. But she didn't move. Neither did he. If I kissed you right now, Kael murmured, would you think it was because I'm trying to manipulate you, to convince you to come to the Shadowlands? Is that why you would be kissing me? No, I would be kissing you because I've been wanting to since the moment you walked into my dinner party in that blue dress. Because you make me feel things I didn't think I was capable of anymore. Because when you laugh at my terrible jokes, I feel like I've won some great victory. His thumb brushed across her cheek. But I won't. Not until you believe that my feelings for you aren't contingent on what you can do for me or where you choose to live. The restraint in his voice, the obvious desire warring with respect for her autonomy, undid something in Seraphina's chest. What if I kissed you? She whispered. His breath caught. Then I would be the luckiest man in either realm. She closed the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Kael's arms came around her waist and Seraphina's hands tangled in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that made her forget they were in a library in public, where anyone could see. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers. I should probably apologize for that, he said. Don't you dare. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Noted. No apologizing for life-changing kisses in library alcoves. Is that what that was? Life-changing? For me it was. You. Seraphina considered. She felt different, like something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of herself and what she wanted. Yes, she admitted. Yes, I think it was. They stayed in the library until the sun set, no longer researching but simply talking. About childhoods and dreams, about the things that had shaped them into who they were. Kael told her about growing up caught between two worlds, never quite demon enough for his father's people, never quite human enough for his mother's. That's why the treaty matters so much to me, he explained. Not just politically, but personally. I want there to be a world where people like me don't have to choose, where we can be both and have that be enough. Is that why you became an emissary? Partly, also because I'm good at it, and because someone needed to build bridges instead of walls. He smiled wryly. Plus, the travel opportunities are excellent. Seraphina laughed. Somehow I don't think you're in this for the tourism. You'd be surprised. The western coast of the Shadowlands has beaches with black sand and water that glows blue at night. It's beautiful in a way that would take your breath away. You really want me to see it, don't you? You're home. More than anything, but only if you want to. I won't be another person putting expectations on you, Seraphina. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. They left the library as the bells told the evening hour. Kael's carriage was waiting, and he insisted on taking her home despite her protests that she could manage. Let me be occasionally chivalrous, he said. It's one of my few attractive qualities. You have several attractive qualities. Only several. I'll have to work on that. The ride to Ashford House was too short. Seraphina found herself wishing they could just keep driving, away from all the complications waiting for her. As the carriage pulled up to her family's estate, Kael took her hand. Think about what I said, about visiting the Shadowlands. You don't have to decide immediately, but the conference is in 3 months. I'd need to make arrangements. I'll think about it, Seraphina promised. But Kael, even if I decide not to come it doesn't have to end. Doesn't it? I'll finish the treaty negotiations and return home. You'll be here. Long-distance pining is romantic in ballads but exhausting in practice. So we only have now. We have now, and we have choices. We can enjoy now and let the future sort itself out, or we can be brave and try to build something that survives separation. He brought her hand to his lips. I know which I prefer, but it has to be both of us choosing it. Seraphina nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I should go in. Mother will be watching from the windows. Undoubtedly, planning my untimely demise for keeping her daughter out past dark. She's actually been surprisingly supportive, in her own terrifying way. Kael helped her down from the carriage, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps longer than necessary. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed. There's a concert at the Royal Gardens. Chamber music, very respectable. Sounds dreadfully boring. I'll be there. She laughed and headed toward the house, feeling his eyes on her until she reached the door. When she looked back, he was still standing by the carriage, a smile on his face that made her heart do complicated things. Inside, her mother was indeed waiting in the drawing room, embroidery in her lap, and an expression of studied casualness on her face. Good evening, dear. Did you have a productive day at the library? Very productive, Seraphina said, fighting a smile. And Lord Malthus, he was a perfect gentleman, I trust. Mostly perfect. He may have slightly forged some credentials to access restricted texts. Catherine's eyebrows rose. I'm not sure if I should be appalled or impressed. I've been having that reaction to him quite a lot lately. Her mother set down her embroidery and patted the sofa beside her. Seraphina sat, and Catherine took her hand. You're falling in love with him. It wasn't a question, but Seraphina answered anyway. I think I might be. Is that foolish? Love is always foolish. That's what makes it worthwhile. Catherine squeezed her hand. He's going to ask you to go with him, you know, when he returns to the Shadowlands. He already has, to visit at least, for a research conference. And are you considering it? I don't know. It feels like such an enormous step. What if I go and realize I don't belong there either? What if I'm just running away from Edmund and what happened? Or what if you go and find exactly where you're meant to be? Catherine asked gently. Seraphina, you've spent your whole life being what others needed you to be. Perhaps it's time to discover what you need for yourself. You wouldn't mind if I left. I would miss you terribly, but I would rather have a happy daughter in the Shadowlands than a miserable one here playing by rules that have never served her well. Catherine smiled. Besides, I hear the shopping in their capital city is extraordinary. I'd expect detailed reports. Seraphina hugged her mother tightly. Thank you. For what? For giving me permission to choose something for myself. Oh, my darling girl, you never needed my permission, but I'm glad you know you have my support. That night, Seraphina lay in bed thinking about choices and futures, and the way Kael's eyes had looked when he talked about his home. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, so certain of her path, and the woman she was becoming, brave enough to imagine a different life entirely. The black roses on her nightstand had fully bloomed, their dark petals perfect and strange. Beautiful because they were unexpected, Kael had said. Maybe that could be her too. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intimacy. Seraphina and Kael attended concerts and lectures, had long debates over dinner, and spent hours in gardens and libraries lost in conversation. The city watched their developing relationship with a mixture of fascination and scandal. Edmund made his disapproval known at every opportunity, cornering Seraphina at social events to warn her about making a terrible mistake. Charlotte seemed caught between jealousy and a strange sort of pity, as if she couldn't decide whether Seraphina was to be envied or mourned. But Seraphina found she cared less and less about their opinions. She was too busy being happy. Kael introduced her to other members of the Shadowlands delegation, and she found herself welcomed into a community of scholars and artists who valued her mind and opinions. Lyra became a genuine friend, sharing books and magical theories with an enthusiasm that matched Seraphina's own. "You fit here," Lyra said one afternoon as they studied a particularly complex spell diagram. "With us, I mean. You should come home with us when the delegation leaves." Kael asked me the same thing. And I'm terrified. What if I don't actually fit? What if it's just novelty and once I'm there, I realize I made a huge mistake? Lyra looked at her thoughtfully. What if it's not? What if you find everything you've been looking for? Isn't the possibility worth the risk? Before Seraphina could answer, a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, the sound of something breaking. Both women hurried to the window. In the street below, a crowd had gathered. Someone was giving a speech, their voice rising in passionate denunciation. "Cannot trust these demons. They come here speaking of peace, but it's a trap. They want to corrupt our youth, steal our magic, destroy our way of life." The speaker was Lord Garrett Blackwood, a conservative noble known for his rigid views. Around him, a group of supporters cheered and waved signs denouncing the treaty. "This happens," Lyra said quietly. "There are always people who prefer fear to understanding." But as Seraphina watched, she saw the crowd growing larger, the mood turning uglier. Someone threw a rock at the embassy windows. It missed, but the intent was clear. "We should get Kael," Seraphina said, suddenly frightened. "Where is he?" "He went to the palace for negotiations with the king. He should be back soon." More rocks flew. This time, one shattered a window on the ground floor. The crowd surged forward, and Seraphina's heart raced with genuine fear. "We need to get everyone inside. Lock the doors." They spent the next frantic minutes securing the embassy, while the demonstration outside grew increasingly violent. The city guards eventually arrived and began dispersing the crowd, but the damage had been done. Several windows were broken, and the embassy's front door had been vandalized with ugly words. Kael returned to chaos. His face went pale when he saw the destruction, and even paler when he saw Seraphina. "You could have been hurt," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You should have left as soon as the trouble started." "I wasn't going to abandon your people when they were under attack." "My people? Seraphina, you're not." He stopped himself, seeming to realize what he was about to say. "Not what? Not one of you? Not part of this?" She pulled back to look at him. "Maybe not officially, but these are my friends now. Lyra, Marcus, all the delegation. Did you think I'd just run away at the first sign of danger?" Something shifted in Kael's expression. No, I suppose I should have known you'd stay. You're brave like that, even when you shouldn't be." That night, the king called an emergency council meeting. Kael had to attend, so Seraphina went home to find her family in an uproar. "Thank heavens you're safe," her father said, embracing her tightly. "We heard about the riot. This association with the Shadowlands delegation has to end, Seraphina. It's too dangerous." "Father, that's exactly what those people want. For us to be afraid, to turn against each other." "They're not entirely wrong to be concerned," her father argued. "The Shadowlands have been our enemies for 1,000 years. Peace doesn't erase that history overnight." "Then maybe it's time to create new history," Seraphina countered. "Maybe it's time to be brave enough to change." Her parents exchanged glances. Finally, her mother spoke. "You're going to go with him, aren't you, when he returns to the Shadowlands?" "I don't know, I haven't decided." But even as Seraphina said it, she realized it wasn't quite true anymore. Somewhere in the past weeks, Her heart had made a decision her mind was only now catching up to. She was going to go. Not forever, perhaps, but long enough to see Kael's world, to present her research, to explore what they could be together without the constant pressure of expectation and scandal. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace. "I need to see him," she said. "Is the council meeting still going on?" Her father nodded. "Likely to run late into the night. The king will want to address the security concerns." Seraphina made a decision. She grabbed a cloak and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" her mother called. "To the palace, to wait for Kael, to tell him." She paused. "To tell him yes." She didn't wait for their response. Outside, she called for a carriage and gave the driver urgent instructions. The city streets were quieter now, the earlier violence subdued by the guard presence. But there was a tension in the air, a sense that something fundamental had shifted. The palace was lit up like a beacon. Guards stopped her at the entrance, but she gave her name and requested to wait in the public gallery for Lord Malthus. After some consultation, they allowed her through. The council chamber's public gallery was nearly empty at this late hour. Below, she could see the king and his advisors in heated debate with Kael and the other Shadowlands representatives. She couldn't hear the specific words, but the body language told the story clearly enough. The negotiations were not going well. She waited for what felt like hours. Finally, the meeting ended. Nobles and diplomats streamed out, their expressions ranging from frustrated to furious. Kael was one of the last to emerge, looking exhausted. Then he saw her, and his whole face transformed. "Seraphina, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you, to tell you." She took a deep breath. "Yes, my answer is yes. I'll come to the Shadowlands, for the conference and for however long after that feels right." For a moment, Kael just stared at her. Then he was moving, crossing the space between them and pulling her into his arms and kissing her like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "After today, after the riot, you still want to associate yourself with us?" "I want to be where you are," Seraphina said simply. "Everything else we'll figure out." "The negotiations are falling apart," Kael admitted. "There's too much fear, too much old hatred. The king wants peace, but his advisors are pushing for harsh restrictions on any treaty. I may have to return home with nothing to show for months of work." "Then we'll go home together," Seraphina said. "And we'll try again. This is too important to give up on." Kael repeated, smiling through his obvious exhaustion. "I like the sound of that." They stood together in the empty palace corridor, the world shifting around them, and Seraphina felt more certain than she ever had about Edmund. This was right. Terrifying and complicated and potentially disastrous, but right. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The news of Seraphina's planned departure spread through noble society like wildfire. Within days, she went from sympathetic former fiancée to scandalous traitor in the court of public opinion. The invitations stopped coming. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Even some of her extended family sent letters expressing their disappointment. But there were unexpected allies, too. Lord Hartley organized a farewell dinner attended by progressive nobles and scholars who saw the treaty as essential. Cassandra, the young healing mage, gave Seraphina a journal bound in dragon hide. "For recording your adventures," she said with a knowing smile. Lyra helped her prepare for the journey, explaining customs and traditions of the Shadowlands. "Don't be surprised if people stare. Humans are rare in the capital, and one who chose to come voluntarily, you'll be quite the curiosity." "That's reassuring," Seraphina said dryly. "You'll be fine. You have Kael, and you have me. Plus, once the magical academics get wind of your ley line theories, you'll have more friends than you know what to do with. We love a good theoretical debate in the Shadowlands. The hardest part was saying goodbye to her parents. Her father had remained distant since her announcement, hurt that she would choose the Shadowlands over her family. But the night before her departure, he came to her room. "I don't understand this choice," he admitted, "but I trust that you've thought it through, and I trust Kael to keep you safe." "You do." "I had him investigated, naturally. Quite thoroughly, actually. He's exactly what he appears to be, a half-demon diplomat with an impeccable reputation for integrity and a slightly concerning obsession with ancient magical texts." Her father managed a small smile. "He reminds me of you in that regard. You always did disappear into the library for days at a time." "I love him, Father. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I do. I know, I can see it in how you look at him, the way I look at your mother." He hugged her tightly. "Write to us, often, and remember that this will always be your home no matter what." Her mother's goodbye was quieter but no less emotional. She helped Seraphina pack, offering advice on what to bring and slipping small comforts into the luggage. Her favorite tea, a shawl she'd knitted, a miniature portrait of the family. "Be happy," Catherine whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, to be happy and free in yourself." "I will, I promise." The morning of departure dawned clear and bright. The Shadowlands delegation had been in the city for 4 months now, and the treaty remained unfinished. But progress had been made, and both sides had committed to continuing negotiations through written correspondence and future visits. Kael had been quieter than usual the past few days, clearly worried about how Seraphina would adjust to her new temporary home. He'd asked her a dozen times if she was certain, if she understood what she was giving up, if she had any second thoughts. Now, standing in the courtyard of the Shadowlands embassy, as servants loaded carriages with luggage and diplomatic papers, he pulled her aside. "Last chance," he said. "You can still change your mind, I'll understand." "Kael, I'm not changing my mind. You're leaving behind everything you know. Your family, your home." She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "I'm not leaving behind everything. I'm carrying the important parts with me, and I'm choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in what was." He caught her hand, kissing her palm. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." The journey to the Shadowlands would take 2 weeks by conventional travel, but the delegation had access to portal magic that would cut the trip to mere hours. Seraphina had never traveled by portal before and was both excited and nervous. Lyra noticed her anxiety and laughed. "It's disorienting the first time, but you get used to it. Just don't eat a heavy breakfast beforehand." The portal was set up in a specially prepared chamber, its swirling surface rippling with colors that shouldn't exist. One by one, the delegation members stepped through and vanished. Finally, only Seraphina and Kael remained. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand. She thought of Edmund, of the life she'd been expected to live, of royal balls where she didn't belong and social expectations that diminished her. Then she thought of black roses blooming in darkness, of Kael's smile when she challenged his theories, of the possibility of a future she chose for herself. "Ready," she said, taking his hand. They stepped through together. The sensation was like being turned inside out and put back together wrong, then corrected just before permanent damage set in. Seraphina stumbled as they emerged on the other side, and Kael caught her. "Told you it was disorienting," Lyra said cheerfully. She was already through and looking perfectly composed. But Seraphina barely heard her. She was staring at the world around them. The Shadowlands. They stood in what appeared to be a receiving hall carved entirely from black volcanic glass. The ceiling soared overhead, inlaid with crystals that glowed with their own inner light. Through the massive windows, she could see a city unlike anything she'd ever imagined. Buildings spiraled upward in impossible architecture, supported by magic as much as engineering. The sky was a deep twilight purple even though it was midday, and 3 moons hung visible against it in different phases. Streams of light flowed through the streets like rivers, magical currents made visible to the naked eye. "Welcome to Umbral City," Kael said softly, watching her face. "Welcome to my home." "It's beautiful," Seraphina breathed. "Nothing like what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Darkness and gloom, I suppose. That's how all the human texts describe it." "We do have darkness," Kael admitted. "But we learned long ago that darkness doesn't have to mean the absence of light, just different kinds of light." Over the next few days, Seraphina began to understand what he meant. The Shadowlands operated on different cycles than the human realm, with periods of deep darkness alternating with the strange twilight glow. But the people had adapted, creating magic that illuminated without the harsh brightness of sunlight. Kael's home was a tower in the academic quarter of the city. It was filled with books, comfortable furniture, and windows that looked out over the glowing streets. He gave Seraphina her own suite of rooms, respecting propriety even as they both acknowledged the growing inevitability of something more. "Take your time adjusting," he said. "There's no pressure to decide anything immediately. You're here for the conference, and after that we'll see." But Seraphina found herself adjusting faster than expected. The academic community welcomed her warmly once they realized she wasn't just Kael's guest, but a serious scholar in her own right. Her ley line theories sparked intense debates that lasted late into the night. She made friends quickly, drawn to the Shadowlands scholars' enthusiasm and lack of pretension. Lady Vivienne, a demon noble who specialized in dimensional theory, took Seraphina under her wing. "Kael's been insufferable since he met you," she confided over tea one afternoon. "Going on and on about your brilliant mind. I thought he was exaggerating, but you really are exceptional." "He talks about me." "Endlessly, it's adorable and somewhat nauseating in equal measure." Vivienne smiled. "He's different with you, happier, more himself. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." The conference was everything Seraphina had hoped for. She presented her research to a packed auditorium, her initial nervousness fading as she lost herself in the material. The questions afterward were challenging but respectful, pushing her to think more deeply about her conclusions. Kael watched from the front row, his pride obvious. When it was over and she'd been swarmed by scholars wanting to discuss her theories further, he managed to extract her and pull her aside. "You were magnificent," he said. "Absolutely magnificent." "I was terrified." "You were brilliant. There's a difference." That night, there was a celebration dinner for all the conference presenters. Seraphina wore a gown in deep crimson that Lyra had helped her choose, cut in Shadowlands style that was more dramatic than she was used to. When Kael saw her, he actually stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with another diplomat. "You're staring," Seraphina said, amused, when she reached his side. "Can you blame me? You're the most beautiful person in the room, and you're here with me. I'm allowed to stare a little." The evening was filled with music and laughter. Seraphina danced with scholars and diplomats, discussing magical theory and cultural differences. But her favorite dance was the last one, when Kael pulled her onto the floor for a slow, romantic piece. "Remember the first time we danced," he murmured as they swayed together. "At the royal ball where your ex-fiancé was showing off his new conquest." "I remember. You asked me if I still loved him." "And you said no, that you loved the idea of him but not him specifically." Kael's hand tightened on her waist. "Do you know when I knew I was falling for you? That exact moment, when you chose complicated honesty over easy lies." "When did you know you'd fallen completely?" "The day of the riot, when you stayed to help protect the embassy instead of running to safety. When I saw you standing there, defiant and brave and absolutely terrifying in your conviction." He smiled. That was when I realized I was completely, irrevocably yours. Seraphina's heart felt too full for her chest. I love you. I should probably say that. I've been thinking it for weeks, but I love you, Kael Malthus. His eyes went wide, then soft. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that means something matters enough to fear losing it. They kissed there on the dance floor, in full view of everyone, and Seraphina didn't care who saw or what they thought. This was her life now, her choice, her happiness. Later, as Kael walked her back to her rooms, he hesitated outside her door. I should probably say goodnight here, he said. Probably. Neither of them moved. Unless you wanted to come in, Seraphina continued. We could talk more about the conference, or the diplomatic situation, or we could stop pretending. We're going to maintain separate bedrooms for much longer. Kael laughed, surprised and delighted. Seraphina Ashford, are you seducing me? Is it working? Devastatingly. He cupped her face in his hands. But I need you to be sure. Not caught up in the romance of the evening, but actually sure. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back for me. You'll have all of me forever if you want it. I'm sure, Seraphina said. I've never been more sure of anything. What happened next was tender and passionate and exactly right. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with laughter and whispered confessions, and the kind of intimacy that comes from truly being seen. Afterward, lying tangled together in Seraphina's bed, Kael traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. Stay, he said quietly. Not just for the conference, not just for a visit, stay with me. Are you asking me to live in sin? Seraphina teased. I'm asking you to marry me, actually. If you'll have me. A half-demon diplomat with too many books and a tendency to forge library credentials. Seraphina's breath caught. That's a terrible proposal. No ring, no getting down on one knee, not even a romantic setting. You're right, I'll do better. He started to move, but she held him in place. Don't you dare, this is perfect, you're perfect. She kissed him softly. Yes, of course, yes. Even though your family will be horrified. Even though human society will call you a traitor. Even though it means choosing this world over the one you were born into. I'm not choosing a world. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. Everything else we'll figure out together. They spent the rest of the night making plans, talking about the future. Kael wanted her to continue her research, to publish and present and become the scholar she was meant to be. Seraphina wanted to help with the treaty negotiations, to build actual bridges between the realms instead of just theoretical ones. We could split our time, she suggested. Part of the year here, part in the human realm, maintain connections in both places. A citizen of two worlds, Kael mused. I like it. We could establish a permanent cultural exchange program. Bring scholars back and forth, prove that cooperation is possible. And eventually, maybe the hatred and fear will fade. Maybe 1,000 years from now, people won't even remember why the realms were separated. That's a beautiful dream. Then let's make it real. The next morning, news of their engagement spread through the academic quarter with predictable speed. Lyra arrived with breakfast and congratulations, claiming she'd known all along this would happen. You're perfect for each other, she said. Both of you brilliant and stubborn and convinced you can change the world through sheer determination. Can't we? Seraphina asked. Oh, you absolutely can. I'm just saying it won't be easy. She was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, as word reached the human realm, the reactions were mixed. Seraphina's parents sent a letter that was equal parts congratulatory and concerned, asking when they might meet their future son-in-law properly. Some of her former friends sent kind notes. Others sent nothing at all. Edmund sent a letter too. Seraphina almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. Seraphina, I hear you're engaged to the demon lord. I suppose I should offer congratulations, though the words stick in my throat. I've had time to think about what you said, about how I treated you, about why I made the choices I did. You were right. I did see you as a safe option, someone who would fit perfectly into my life without disrupting it. And when a more politically advantageous match presented itself, I took it without considering the cost. Charlotte is beautiful and well-connected, but she's not you. She doesn't challenge me or make me think differently about the world. She doesn't look at me the way you looked at Malthus at that ball, like I hung the stars. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I realize now what I lost, and I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry. I hope you find all the happiness you deserve, even if it's not with me. Even if it's in a realm I don't understand with a man I can't help but resent for being everything I failed to be. Edmund. Seraphina read the letter twice, then set it aside. There was a time when those words would have meant everything to her, when an apology from Edmund would have felt like vindication, like proof that she had mattered. But now she felt only a distant sort of pity. Edmund had realized his mistake too late, and he would have to live with that. It wasn't her responsibility to absolve him. She was too busy being happy. The wedding was planned for 2 months later, a fusion of human and Shadowlands traditions. They would have 2 ceremonies, one in Umbral City and one in the human realm, in the gardens of Ashford House. Both realms would see that love could bridge any divide. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Seraphina threw herself into the cultural exchange program she and Kael were developing. They secured funding from both governments, recruited scholars willing to cross realms, and began drafting curriculum for joint studies. "You're a force of nature," Kael said one evening, watching her work on yet another proposal. "Has anyone ever told you that?" "You have, several times. Usually when I'm refusing to sleep because I'm too excited about a project. It's one of your most attractive qualities, also one of your most exhausting." Seraphina laughed and set down her pen. "I'm just so excited about all of this. The possibilities, the potential for real change. We're actually doing it, Kael. We're building the future we imagined." "We are, though I'd like you to be well-rested enough to enjoy said future." He pulled her to her feet. "Come on, there's something I want to show you." He led her to the roof of the tower where they lived. The 3 moons were all visible tonight, casting overlapping shadows across the city. But what took Seraphina's breath away was what Kael had prepared. The roof had been transformed into a garden. Not a traditional garden with earth and sunlight, but something uniquely Shadowlands. Flowers that bloomed in darkness, their petals glowing with soft luminescence. Vines that grew on magical currents instead of trellises. And at the center, a single black rose bush, transplanted from somewhere and thriving in its new home. "You remembered," Seraphina whispered. "Of course I remembered. You kept the roses I gave you at that first dinner party. I noticed them on your nightstand every time I visited your rooms." He plucked one of the black roses and offered it to her. "I thought you might like your own garden here, a piece of our beginning growing into something new." She took the rose, tears pricking her eyes. "It's perfect, you're perfect." "I'm really not, but I try to be for you." They stood together under the alien moons, in a garden that shouldn't exist, and Seraphina felt a peace she'd never known before. This was home. Not a place or a realm, but this person, this partnership, this choice to keep choosing each other. The wedding in Umbral City was a spectacular affair. Demons and the few human diplomats in attendance mingled as Seraphina walked down an aisle of glowing crystal toward Kael, who waited in formal Shadowlands attire that made him look like some dark prince from a fairy tale. The ceremony blended traditions from both cultures. They exchanged rings forged from metals native to both realms. They spoke vows in both languages. And when the officiant pronounced them married, the whole city erupted in celebration. "Hello, wife," Kael murmured as they had their first dance as a married couple. "Hello, husband." The words felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. How does it feel to be married to a human? Like I've won some cosmic lottery I didn't know I'd entered. He spun her through a turn. How does it feel to be married to a demon? Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The second ceremony in the human realm was smaller, but no less meaningful. Seraphina's parents welcomed Kael into the family with surprising warmth. Her father had long conversations with him about magical theory and diplomatic strategy. Her mother insisted on giving him a full tour of the family estate, sharing embarrassing stories about Seraphina's childhood. "Your family is wonderful," Kael said, as they prepared for bed in Seraphina's childhood room the night after the ceremony. "They like you. Mother cornered me earlier to tell me you're far better than Edmund ever was." I could have told her that. Seraphina laughed. "Your humility is truly inspiring." I prefer to think of it as accurate self-assessment. The next morning, as they prepared to return to the Shadowlands, Seraphina took one last walk through the gardens of Ashford House. So much had changed since that first royal ball. She was different now, stronger, braver, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. Edmund and Charlotte's wedding had happened the week before. Seraphina had sent a polite gift but declined the invitation. There was no animosity, but no need to attend either. That chapter of her life was closed. "Ready?" Kael asked, finding her by the lily pond. "Almost." She turned to him. "Do you remember what you said at that first ball, about doing what I wanted, consequences be damned?" "I remember." "Thank you. For challenging me, for seeing me, for giving me the courage to choose myself." "Seraphina, you've always had that courage. I just helped you remember it was there." He took her hands. "Now, let's go home and change the world together." They returned to the Shadowlands and dove into their work. The cultural exchange program flourished beyond their wildest expectations. Scholars from both realms collaborated on projects that would have been impossible before. Slowly but surely, the centuries of mistrust began to erode. Seraphina published her ley line research to international acclaim. She was offered a permanent position at the Shadowlands Academy and accepted, becoming the first human to teach there in recorded history. Kael's diplomatic work continued, with regular trips back to the human realm to advance the treaty negotiations. The fact that he was married to a respected human scholar helped his cause considerably. It was harder to demonize the Shadowlands when one of their own had chosen to call it home. 5 years after that first royal ball, Seraphina and Kael returned to the human realm for a special occasion. King Aldrich was signing the final treaty, officially ending 1,000 years of separation. The ceremony was held in the same ballroom where Seraphina had once stood watching her ex-fiancé dance with his new love. But now, she stood at Kael's side as he represented the Shadowlands in this historic moment. As the king's pen touched paper, making peace official, Kael reached for Seraphina's hand. She squeezed back, thinking about all the unlikely events that had led them here. A broken engagement, a chance encounter, a willingness to imagine a different future. After the ceremony, there was a ball. Seraphina wore silver this time, her favorite color, and Kael led her onto the floor for the first dance. "Remember the last time we danced here?" she asked. "I remember everything about that night, how beautiful you looked, how sad, how brave." He pulled her closer. "I remember thinking I'd do anything to make you smile. And now? Now I know I was right. You're still beautiful, still brave, but not sad anymore. Happy, I hope." "Deliriously," Seraphina confirmed, "though I never imagined my life would turn out this way." "Neither did I. I came to that ball thinking I'd observe political dynamics and maybe gather some intelligence." Instead, I found you." He kissed her softly, not caring about the watching crowd. "Best intelligence-gathering mission of my life." Across the ballroom, Seraphina caught a glimpse of Edmund and Charlotte. They looked settled, comfortable, not passionately happy, but content. Edmund met her eyes briefly and nodded, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a blessing. She nodded back, then turned her attention fully to Kael. To her husband, her partner, her choice. "Dance with me," she said. "Always," he promised. And as they swept across the floor where they'd first met, Seraphina reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. She'd come to this ballroom once as a heartbroken woman watching her ex flaunt his new love. She'd left it as someone brave enough to imagine a different future. And that future had exceeded every dream. The demon lord had knelt before her, not in supplication but in partnership. He'd offered her a world, a life, a love beyond anything she'd thought possible, and she'd been brave enough to take it. That, Seraphina thought as Kael spun her through a turn, was the real magic. Not the portals or the glowing crystals or the 3 moons, but the courage to choose happiness over convention, love over fear, and to build a future that honored both where she'd been and where she was going. "I love you," she told Kael as the music swelled. "I love you too," he replied, "now and always in this realm and every other." And they danced on into their happily ever after, partners in all things, citizens of 2 worlds, and proof that love could bridge any divide.